Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, a show in which we will give you facts, we will give you opinions, but unlike all the other radio and TV shows, this is the one where you get to have your say as well. So Thursday and Friday of last week, Mrs. May was there at the European Summit. Did you see that photograph of her sitting on her own at a table, waiting for the big boys like Juncker to come into the room? How did she get on? Well, you could argue that the language that was being used by at least some of the other leaders was a little more conciliatory than perhaps we'd heard before, though I notice from Monsieur Barnier and Monsieur Juncker, nothing very friendly at all was said. And we now hear that David Davis is hopping on Eurostar tomorrow morning and going to meet the French government in another attempt to try to get them to give more concessions. It would appear that the divorce bill, as it's being called, is a major stumbling block before they will even lower themselves to come and talk to us about a future trade deal. And if that wasn't difficult enough, she's got some big battles on the home front too. And Keir Starmer today, Sir Keir Starmer, who is, of course, the shadow Brexit minister, he has laid out 6 red lines that he wants to see as part of the Brexit bill, you know, the Great Repeal Act that has to go through the House of Commons. The trouble is, it isn't just Labour that will support the idea, in particular, that Parliament should have the final say on whatever deal. Of course, the SNP will support it, the Liberal Democrats will support it, but equally, people like Ken Clarke and Anna Soubry will support it. Can the government actually get this through without an amendment, perhaps, that says that Parliament must have the final say? And so what I'm going to debate here with you this morning is, do you trust Parliament to have the final say on whether to take us out of the European Union? And you can answer me on that by calling 0345 6060 973. You can text to 84850. You can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. And you can, of course, not only watch on Facebook Live, but comment there too. So, to try and help us through all of this, I'm going to a proper expert. His name is Bruno Waterfield. He's the Brussels correspondent for The Times. He was there at the summit on Thursday and Friday, and he is, I hope you won't mind me saying, Bruno, something of a Brussels veteran. How many of these summits, Bruno, have you been to over the years?
Oh, I don't care to think about it.
Right.
It's 15 years worth. I've never been called a proper expert before. No,
well, okay.
I'm not quite sure how to take it.
Well, except veteran then, if nothing else. Okay. Help us through this, because, I mean, I've obviously got my own point of view. You know, I felt it was a pretty dismal performance at the summit, and I've been reading Tory-supporting newspapers on Saturday talking about breakthrough and what a marvellous day the Prime Minister had had. I mean, give me your assessment. What kind of summit do you think Mrs May had?
Well, I think it was a summit where they didn't want to kick her when she's down, and the reason why they don't want to kick her when she's down is she might not get up again, and they might end up with Boris Johnson, and Boris Johnson particularly exercises the imagination of the Germans, who really don't like him because of comments he's made comparing the EU to some kind of Nazi project. So it was all about, you know, making sure that she wasn't too humiliated by playing a lot of lip service to what she said in her speech in Florence, when she made some pretty big concessions and didn't really get anything in return for them. So what they decided to do was something they're going to have to do anyway, and something that Michel Barnier wanted to do anyway, something that countries like the Netherlands and Belgium, Denmark, and possibly even France have a lot of trading links with Britain, were very keen on, was to try and start, they call it scoping. It's a horrible word. But
how very Brussels, eh?
Technical, it's a technical term for working out trade agreements, and particularly working out this transition that people like Philip Hammond, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, are very keen on. But they were probably going to do that anyway. And the problem that Theresa May has, and she had at the summit, is that basically the EU pocketed what she said at Florence. They just put it in their pocket and said, right, give us some more. And that's why she's still under pressure. That's why she didn't get what she wanted, which was this declaration of sufficient progress in response to a speech allowing them to move on to the next level. And she didn't get that, and she's under pressure, particularly on the money. And the reason she's under pressure on the money is the money is one thing that EU can really agree on. They're all a bit split on trade, actually, and trade with Britain. But when it comes to getting more money out of Britain, there's total unity.
And, in your view, what do we owe once we've left the European Union?
Well, we'll probably never know. We will probably never know. We'll probably never know the full amount because no one wants to write it down. Michel Barnier won't want it written down because some people say he hasn't got enough out of Britain. And the Brits won't want it written down because it's very embarrassing and rather contentious within the government cabinet. It depends how you calculate it. Most people believe that in her Florence speech, when she said after Brexit, no government would be worse off, no project would be worse off, no one would have to pay more into the budget. That promise cost around about 23 billion euros. Mm-hmm. Then there's something really horrible and incomprehensible called the resta liquide, which are these very long-term commitments in the budget. There's contingent liabilities, as they're called, such as the pensions to be paid for Eurocrats in the decades after Brexit, which the EU says Britain is on the hook for. When you add that money in, you're adding in at least some 40 billion. So the total bill, according to one very, very senior EU diplomat on Friday afternoon, is about 60 billion euros. Most people think the total bill will come in at around 40 to 50 billion euros. Now, it's important to note that the divorce bill isn't as such new money that Britain will pay, in the sense that it's in the Treasury estimates. It's the money that Britain would have paid eventually had it stayed in the EU, but obviously for Brexit voters, it doesn't mean that money will be coming back. It will be
no. And what about our assets, Bruno? What about our investments in the European Investment Bank? I mean, surely this can't all be negative, can it?
Well, the really interesting little fact out of the negotiations is Britain hasn't even talked about the assets. Yes, it's leaving the assets until last, and this is probably quite cunning because logically, and Green MEPs, your colleague Philippe Lambert has pointed this out before. Logically, if Britain is on the hook for liabilities, historical liabilities, and future liabilities, think of those very, very generous pensions that we'll be paying to retired MEPs and retired European civil servants. If Britain is on the hook for those, then presumably Britain gets a share of the assets as well. How can Britain be on the hook for future and past liabilities
without the assets?
Not entitled to a share of assets that have been built up over the past and into the future.
And given
that's an interesting question, and I think they're just leaving. I think they're leaving that one until after. That's it.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And Bruno, tell me, what do you think the prospects are of, by the end of this year, us actually being involved, not in the prospect or the scoping of what trade talks may be? What hope is there of us being in trade talks by the end of the year, in your view?
Well, just before the summit, and the summits do tend to be rather pre-cooked, an ambassador from, he didn't want his country to be named, an ambassador said that he thought it was 50-50. So, toss a coin in the air. And you might know. Just last week, Donald Tusk, the president of the European Council, the guy who chairs the summits and a very important player, a very canny mover, he said that if there wasn't this stage in December, the staging post in December, they'd have to rethink again where they were heading. They'd have to actually think, is this working? Is this process working? So December is going to be very, very important. I think it is a bit of tossing a coin in the air. On the EU side, they are not united. They declare how united they are, which should tell you how fragile it all is.
And they're also in no rush, are they?
Push on the money.
It seems to me that from Monsieur Barnier's perspective as the chief negotiator, the more he can string us out, the better in some ways.
Well, in one sense it is, but you've got to bear in mind there are some countries, the Netherlands particularly, France too, though. The Calais railhead is 31.5 million tonnes of freight every year, and they're beginning to get a little bit nervous, very nervous, in fact, as we go into the new year. They go into the new year without any kind of certainty.
Yeah.
It's going to be very, very difficult for companies to issue contracts, even airline tickets and all the rest.
Absolutely.
So a lot of countries are beginning to get a little bit jumpy. They're beginning to say to Barnier, come on,
Yeah.
we're getting worried.
Bruno Waterfield, Brussels correspondent for The Times, thank you very much for your thoughts and views and all of this. Well, it sounds a bit like we're stuck in treacle, really, doesn't it? We're not really getting anywhere. Things are tough there, but in some ways, things are beginning to get even tougher at home as Keir Starmer puts forward his 6 red lines, the key one being that they will not vote for the Brexit bill, the Great Repeal bill that the government's putting ahead, unless Parliament, not ministers, get the final say on our deal or no deal, whatever it may be. And of course there are plenty of Tories who will also support that position. So I'm asking you this morning, do you trust Parliament to have a final say on this? Let me tell you, I don't. The political class have learnt nothing from the referendum of last year. They want to stop Brexit, and if this goes back at the end of all of this, for the Commons to have a final say, whatever the deal is, the chances are they will reject it because they want to keep us inside the European Union. They'll reject it, and they could even bring the government down. We voted to leave. No ifs, no buts. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show. It's 10:15. As Sir Keir Starmer from the Labour Party piles pressure on the government and seeks to form an alliance with rebels sitting on the Tory backbenches, it may well be that Parliament does finish up getting the final say on whatever Brexit deal we do or do not get. And I'm asking you, would you trust Parliament to have that final say? I could even say, would you trust our political class? Could I not? Gary in Tamworth is my first call of the morning. Hello.
Hello, Nigel. It's great to talk to you finally. I've been a staunch kipper for years.
Right. So
I'm still a staunch kipper.
Yeah.
We're still going.
So do you, given that you're a proper Eurosceptic, would you trust a deal or no deal to go back to the House of Commons?
I wouldn't trust them as far as I could chuck Tony Blair.
Right.
The problem we've got is we've got 4 out of the 6 of the cabinet discussing Brexit with the EU are Remainers.
Yep.
You've got 70% of the MPs are Remainers that are trying to keep us in. To me, it's like the cabinet. It's like having Churchill having Lord Aurora and Oswald Mosley on the cabinet during the war.
Right. Well, that's a very graphic.
It's absolutely ridiculous.
Very graphic way of looking at it, Gary. So you don't trust. I mean, do you think if it did go back to Parliament, do you feel that the Brexit vote could be betrayed?
Yes, definitely. Well, it will be. I know it will be. It's a certainty.
Right.
Because they want to remain.
They want to remain. So that effectively, Gary, that would overturn the referendum, wouldn't it?
Yep. They ain't bothered.
I tell you what, Gary, stay there a second. I've got somebody else on, Peter in Wimbledon, who I'm told's got a very different view. Peter, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. Nigel, what I'd like to say is you're one of the biggest conmen and hypocrites in the history of British politics.
Oh, right. Well, thank you. That's very nice of you. And a very good start to the call. And they're both, they are both actually very high accolades indeed. Do continue.
Yeah, well, my point is, as far as I remember, we live in parliamentary democracy. We elect our parliamentarians to act on our behalf and to do what's in the best interest of the country and ordinary people. Not like yourself, you know. You said after the referendum, you're stepping aside. You're going to Brussels. You're going to be negotiating.
But Peter, do we trust Parliament? Do we trust Parliament?
This is a system. What would you suggest? We abandon our democracy, or we just choose?
I'll tell you what we do, Peter. I'll tell you what we do. I'll tell you what we did. Under normal circumstances, you're right. Under normal circumstances, we elect our MPs for a 5-year period to act in our interests. You know, that is the form of representative democracy by which this country is governed. However, a huge exception was made here, because Parliament decided that on this fundamental constitutional question, it wasn't representatives that would decide it, it was us, the people, that decided it. And surely, given that situation, isn't it for those representatives now to respect the wishes of the people?
The wishes of 52% of brainwashed and deluded by people like you.
Oh dear! Oh, this is very poor quality stuff, isn't it, Peter? Really. I mean, you may not like the outcome of the referendum, but there were some very powerful arguments as to why we should leave. It wasn't all fake news or smoke and mirrors. There were some strong arguments, Peter, such as we should govern our own country. I mean, what's wrong with that as an argument?
Well, in order for us to get behind you guys, people like you, what you need to do, guys, on the Leave side, you should come up clean with all your lies, what you sold to the British...
I tell you what, Peter, I tell you what. You give me one lie that I told in the referendum. Just give me one.
Well, you stood in front of that poster saying about Syrian refugees coming to this country. Where are they?
Oh, I stood in front of a poster exposing Merkel's madness, and look at the impact it's having on European politics everywhere. And absolutely, and when you look, Peter, at the insanity of those photographs, the way that it has really upset tens of millions of people in Europe, I completely stand by that slogan: the EU has failed us all.
What has it got to do with the United Kingdom, Nigel? You're not answering the question.
Peter, once someone's got a European passport, they're entitled to come to Britain. Simple as. Sorry, tell me, you were going to give me a lie. Please give me a lie.
Well, I've given you one. And there are so many...
No, you haven't.
On the other side,
no, you haven't.
Have a deal with the European Union. The deal's going to be so easy to make because they need us more than we need them. Since the Brexit, Nigel, if you check, standard of living's gone down, and you should know that better than anyone. Yeah, the people. No,
actually, thankfully, wages have, after over 10 years of being very depressed, started to go up. The stock market's near at an all-time high. Exports are good. There's a lot more good news out there than bad. Peter, thank you. And I challenge anyone: tell me any lie I told in that referendum, and you won't find one. You may not agree with it, but it wasn't lies. And this has almost become the establishment excuse for the revolution of 2016. In America, it has to be the Russians. Trump could not possibly have won unless the Russians had interfered. And in this country, Brexit only won because people were lied to, apparently. Tim is calling from Bishop Stortford. Tim, good morning. Do you trust our MPs and our political class to have this final decision?
Well, the simple answer to that, Nigel, is no, of course not. Basically, what we've got to remember, and this hasn't changed, that the majority of the members of Parliament, whether they're Labour, Conservative or whatever, don't want to leave the EU.
Yep.
And their views haven't changed. We've even got a Prime Minister who's admitted she doesn't believe in the Brexit cause, and she's supposed to be fighting our corner. The previous caller that made, I think, the rather unfortunate connection with Mosley during the war, but it's very similar. We've got somebody, the people that are leading their campaign to negotiate a position don't actually believe in it.
It is a very odd thing, Tim, I must admit. I was talking yesterday to a long-term Eurosceptic who, like me, left the Conservative Party over 25 years ago. He said, isn't it ironic that we fought this lonely battle for a quarter of a century, we got to a referendum, we got over the line, and now, of course, the people running it are the very people we've been fighting for 25 years. And so that is a real problem. Do you think Brexit could be betrayed, Tim?
Honestly, I believe that there's a strong possibility that Parliament will attempt to stop it at some stage. And, it is ironic, isn't it? We've been in the EU all these years, and all these laws, directives and regulations we've rubber-stamped through Parliament. Not one MP has spoken up about talking about them. Now, suddenly, every minutiae they want control of, which I find is incredibly hypocritical.
Yeah, no,
I'm really worried.
I get that, Tim.
Really
I get that, Tim. And I'm even more angry, Tim, in terms of breach of trust and faith. They were elected on manifestos. On manifestos that said, both Tory and Labour manifestos said, leave the European Union, leave the single market, end free movement of people. And here we are, a few months down the line, and they're prepared to completely turn turtle on it. Tim, I thank you for your call. On Facebook, Peter says, it looks like the EU will have its cake and eat it. Darryl says, stop the talking, let's get walking. Anthony says, no, we don't trust them. We want to move forward, not 200 years backwards. Chris says, I trust the Parliament more than the general public, to be honest. That's at a push. Conrad says, where's the plan, Nigel? You've campaigned for years to quit, and you should have been in there with the government sharing your plans. Conrad, they don't want to talk to me. They are, after all, as has been said already this morning, nearly all Remainers. Nearly all Remainers. And even the Leavers only came out as Leavers in the last few months, and in many cases they appear now to have compromised quite a few of the things they stood for during the campaign, such as cabinet ministers who are Leavers supporting the concept of a transition period, delaying this years and years and years down the line. Andrew is calling me from Docklands. Andrew, good morning.
Yes, good morning, Nigel. I don't think that, I don't trust the Parliament to have the say at all. It seems that for us, that as people sort of woken up to what they are really like, they're not looking after the people, they're looking after their own careers, and they're also looking after the high prices that corporations and the people in control of the marketplace can actually charge. Prices would drop, and I think free competition across the whole of the EU would bring up all of those smaller countries, and those smaller countries would come up to our standard instead of us taking all of their skilled people and then chucking aid at them.
Which we have done, haven't we? We have done. This never ever gets mentioned, Andrew, is the effect that mass migration has actually had on some of those countries. I'll share a story with you. I was in Lithuania a couple of years ago at a big conference, and I was talking to the Prime Minister of Lithuania, and I said, come on, how many people have left Lithuania since you joined the European Union? It's over 20% of the population. And amongst that are nearly all their graduates in law, in economics and in medicine. So a lot of these countries like Lithuania, Andrew, have literally been stripped out of all their talent.
Yes, and the thing is the capital flows would go to those countries that have got the talented people. If we didn't stop bringing them here, which is really what's happening, we're trying to gain an advantage, or the political class and the corporate class are trying to gain a huge advantage and crush small countries instead of letting everybody come to the same standard under their own steam. And that's the way to do it.
When you examine it, Andrew,
it's so important.
When you examine it, it's not that pretty a European Union at all, is it? Andrew from Docklands, I thank you. Right now you're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's 10:30. A lot of parliamentarians are now saying they think Parliament, not ministers, should have the final decision over whatever deal we do or do not get from the European Union. And given the current pace of progress, it's very optimistic, very difficult to be optimistic about a particularly good deal. That may be the case, it may not. But should Parliament have that say? Do we trust our politicians to have that say? Or could it be used by our career political class to effectively overturn the Brexit result and perhaps in the process even bring the government down? Well, much as our politicians are becoming more pro-EU, certainly a lot more pro-EU than the manifestos they were elected on back on June the 8th, across the rest of Europe, we're seeing a very different picture. The elections last weekend in Austria saw the Conservative Party, who certainly want quite strong immigration controls, top the polls, but we also saw the Freedom Party, very hardline Eurosceptics, getting 26% of the vote. And overnight, we've got the results in from the Czech general election, and a populist billionaire called Mr. Babis and his party have won the election, and they've won it by a mile. They've got 30% of the vote, and the next nearest party is on about 10% of the vote. He is saying that the European Union needs to learn the lessons of Brexit, and he wants strict immigration controls. And it isn't just his party with that kind of line that's done well. Another party, which is very hardline, Eurosceptic, but equally very strongly anti-Islam, they've come third in the election. So once again, what we see are traditional parties like the Social Democrats in the Czech Republic, the pro-EU party, collapsing down to 7% of the vote. The revolution of 2016 is still rolling. It's still happening. And I know that Tony Blair and Hillary Clinton and others don't want to believe it. Look at the figures. It's still happening. Europe is moving, not just to the right, but it's moving in a very, very firmly Eurosceptic direction. Mrs. Merkel's folly of saying anyone that wants to come will be welcome has fundamentally changed European politics. Of that, I've got no doubt at all. So, Sandra, in Bedford, would you trust Parliament with a final say on whatever deal Theresa May gets?
Well, hello, Nigel.
Good morning.
I'd appreciate some honesty, even for MPs whose constituents voted to leave. And if the MPs think my problem that I never realised when I voted to leave, Nigel, I never realised that, I never looked down the line and thought, how will Parliament agree all these new laws, rules and regulations? Our Parliament can't agree on anything now. So why is it's not even, it's huge. I can't even understand how we're ever going to get anything new in place.
Well, I mean, when you voted to leave, Sandra, you didn't vote for any particular economic model or new trade deal, did you? You just voted to leave.
I voted to leave, but I was silly though, because we don't know what we're voting for. I didn't know what I was voting for. It was lovely. It sounded good. But now I don't think it is the right way for us.
So would you like us to rejoin the European Union and have and head towards a European... Oh, joining the Euro, of course, would be part of it, because Mr Juncker's very keen on that now. It's going to be compulsory, and we'd have to join a European army. I mean, that's the point, Sandra, isn't it? That either you want to be part of this political union or you don't. That's the real fundamental choice.
Well, yeah, I tell you what, really, the choice is... We're not Great Britain anymore. We're just a little island. And Europe they will succeed. And I think to fall out with them and constantly hammer them and hate them like you are.
So are they succeeding in Catalonia today, Sandra?
Sorry?
Do you think the European Union is succeeding in Catalonia when it completely refuses to condemn 900 people being assaulted and wounded by the Spanish police?
But the trouble with you, Nigel, you make it sound so easy. Everything sounds so easy. I feel sorry for every MP and the House of Lords having to deal with this really tricky situation. And I take my hat off to you. You're great on the radio. But you walked away from politics.
No, Sandra. I'm leading a group in the European Parliament. I've been giving speeches all over Europe over the course of the last few months. Yeah. I'm trying to encourage European businesses to put pressure on their leaders to get them to move towards some sensible trade talks. I haven't walked away, Sandra, at all.
OK, yeah, but you're dangerous.
I know, because I've got these ideas about democracy and the nation and identity. And actually, you're quite right. When it comes to the economics of this, it's complicated. But the big choice, actually, is the simplest choice that we've ever faced in our lives. Did we wish to be part of a political union called the EU, or to leave it and to be an independent, self-governing nation? And that, Sandra, was the big choice, was it not?
It was a choice, but what do we do instead then? Who do we...
We govern ourselves rather than being governed by Mr Juncker. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that.
Do you not think we're going to have to barter for our trade deals and please, Peter,
We've got do you know what, Sandra? The whole world is queuing up to do trade deals with us, and 85% of the global economy is outside the Eurozone. Of course I want us to have a grown-up, sensible trade deal with our next-door neighbours in Europe. The people getting in the way of that at the moment are Juncker, Barnier and Verhofstadt. Sandra, I thank you for your call. I've got to move on to David in Kilburn. David, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Farage.
Good morning. So, do we trust Parliament to decide this in the end?
No, we don't.
Okay.
I can't believe what's going on. I think they should walk out of all of this trade deal negotiations as well. I mean, this is a great country, Nigel. And the way...
Oh, Sandra, David, Sandra, who was on before you, said we're just a little country, we're not Great Britain. You disagree with that, yeah?
Oh, no. Oh, we are a great country. Look at our universities. The greatest on the top 10s. Come on. The European Union is run by France and Germany. Look at it.
Mm-hmm.
We got no say in it. And I voted to leave. And I think Parliament should respect what we voted for. Leave the European Union. And that's what we voted for. And that's what I want to see.
Okay.
And I think Mrs.
No, fine, David, you couldn't be clearer. And just finally, one quick question for you, David. Would you continue, as Theresa May is, with these endless rounds of negotiations, or do you feel perhaps we're kind of wasting our time with this and we should simply walk away?
I think we should walk out of this. It's nonsense. Look at Malta. Who is Malta telling us all this? Malta is just a small fish. And look at what they're saying. Come on, we need to walk out of this and start doing our own thing and make this country great as it should be.
Make Britain great again, says David in Kilburn. Where have I heard that before? Thank you. Richard is calling me from Mansfield. Richard, good morning.
Good morning, Nigel.
So, what do you think? Should Parliament have the final say?
Yes, I do. Well, the reason I think they do is because I think we've really rushed this idea through a bit too fast, and I think what's happened is now, as soon as you ask that question, should they have the final say, people straight away panic that it's going to be overturned. And I think what's happened is from when David Cameron said that, as soon as the referendum, as soon as we vote to leave, we're going to issue Article 50, as soon as he said that, and he didn't, people started to panic that the government would try to overturn it. And what's happened as a result is we've rushed things through without planning properly.
Well, Richard, just answer those 2 points very quickly. Firstly, on fears of this being overturned, look, let's be frank, the Labour Party fought on a manifesto of getting us out of everything, including the single market, taking back border controls. They've completely gone, Richard, 180 degrees in the opposite direction. So anyone that fears things being overturned just need to look at what Corbyn's done, and they've got a right to be concerned. And you say we've rushed this, but come on, Theresa May didn't trigger Article 50 for 9 months, did she?
Yeah, no, and I think that's fine if you're not going to trigger Article 50, because you've got to remember, we didn't have a Brexit secretary when she first came in, so yes, she did need time to implement things. And changing, I don't mind Labour changing their mind, and I don't mind people changing their minds, because that's what happens when you don't wish things.
Richard, 4 months after a general election, and you change around the most fundamental question facing the country today by 180 degrees. That's not very straight dealing, is it?
No, but at the end of the day, we want a good deal. I mean, regardless of the or the detail, we want a good deal, and I think fundamentally, you need to plan for it, and we haven't planned for it, and I think that's what will, in the end. Well, if we do get a bad deal, it won't be because it was a bad idea. It's because we've tried to rush things instead of actually just sitting. And I can understand why people have been really nervous about actually sitting there.
What a pity, Richard. What a pity that David Cameron and George Osborne did not have some plans in place, a plan B, in case the referendum went the way they didn't want. But of course, there was none of that. They were so arrogant, they believed they were simply going to win. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. So it's 10:45. Parliament gets the final say on whatever the Brexit deal is or is not. What would that actually mean? Well, what it would mean, I suspect, is they would move very quickly to a motion of confidence debate in the government. We'd probably finish up, ultimately, being forced into having another referendum, would be my guess, because that's what the parties would have to say at the next election to get people to vote for them. I don't trust Parliament on this one little bit, and I really do think just a few months after the general election, on which nearly all of them were elected on manifestos that said we were going to leave the single market, take back control of our borders, I really think this is perhaps in terms of a breach of trust between the governors and the governed, potentially about the most serious thing that has happened for a very long time in this country. Hi, Nigel, do we trust Parliament? Lol, says Tony. Laugh a lot. He clearly doesn't, and I must admit, that's a little bit the way that I feel. If you don't trust Parliament to have the final say on Brexit, then what's the point of having elections or a Parliament at all, says Lewis in Thornton Heath. Lewis, I've explained that once before. We have a form of representative democracy where once every 4 or 5 years, we vote for the men and women to represent us and make decisions on our behalf. They then come before us at the end of that term and say, how have I done? Is it good enough or isn't it good enough? But in this case, the referendum was given to us on Brexit. That decision was subcontracted out from Parliament to us, and we made the decision. And surely they should hold faith with that decision. That's certainly my view. On Twitter, I thought Parliament basically said that we can make this decision when we ask the people. Well, yes, of course, and that's what I thought too. Maureen's calling from Leeds. Maureen, do you trust our political class?
Not so much, I'll be honest with you. Hello, Nigel. Nice
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. But the main thing I would like to say before I say anything else is we never voted to join the European Union, the EU. We voted to join the EEC, the European Economic Community.
Yep.
And it's been a big lie all the way through,
quite right.
You know,
quite right.
We certainly never voted for them to make all our rules and regulations, which is what's been happening, you know. And this is why I voted to come out when we had the opportunity to do so, you know.
Do you know, Maureen, when they talk about lies, what they really talk about is Boris and the 350 million a week figure, which should have been a little bit lower. And they say our side have lied. Maureen, what you've just said is absolutely my feeling too. I think the establishment have been lying to us for 50 years about this.
Well, I think so too. You've got to think it's a case of numbers. The number of immigrants that were coming in, and I'm not a bit racist, I'll be honest with you. We couldn't cope with the sheer numbers because it was affecting our housing, our education, particularly the health service. You know now when you need treatment, you have to wait months and months and months because we're trying to deal with so many people in the country, you know.
Well, that was certainly one of the factors, Maureen, and it was a massissive factor, and it was probably the biggest factor because of the impact. Because of the impact it had on, public services and everything else, and wages. But the real issue, Maureen, is we're just a few months on from a general election when they all got elected on manifestos that said they'd take us out. Now the Labour Party and others are changing their mind. Would you trust them? Would you trust them if it went back to Parliament for a final say? Would you trust them to hold faith with the electorate?
No, I wouldn't, to be honest with you. No.
No. OK. No, Maureen, thank you. Maureen wouldn't trust them. Salah is calling from Perryvale. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Farage.
Good morning.
I do agree that the Parliament has the right to vet the deal.
Right.
This is what we are voting them for. This is the job. After all, Tony Blair, with a big majority, he took us into the Gulf War while all the public opinion was against it. Tony Blair put a hold on the 7 years which all the EEs and the EU members have to wait until they have the freedom of movement, and he abandoned it, and they had a majority. This is what democracy works.
Normally, Salah, I would agree with you entirely that we vote for a parliament, and from within that parliament a government, and their job is pretty much to get on with it. And I understand that and I get that. But do you agree with me that this is an exceptional circumstance where that big decision was subcontracted out for us to make? And surely, Salah, if we've made that decision, shouldn't it be respected?
Mr. Farage, the referendum is advisory. The Parliament has contracted out to us. We, the public, 48 and 52% is a very small majority. But this is democracy. We have to be out of the EU, even though I voted Remain, but I prefer to go to the EEC. I quite like what you said when you were campaigning, when you said we don't have to be politically united with Europe to do trade. This was a very good statement you made.
Yeah, well, let's hope our government can negotiate it. Salah, I thank you very much indeed for your call. I'm going to go to Carol in Folkestone. Carol, good morning to you. Would you trust this decision to go back to Parliament? Do you think?
Can I just come in and say to you that as far as I understand, the EU doesn't recognise referendums. Now, it seems to me that we're just being ignored. The UK's referendum was taken, and as you know, many people actually backed it. Catalonia it's more brutal for these people when they were looking for independence, but it just seems to me that it's just being ignored.
Well, the point is that, of course, that Denmark voted against the Maastricht Treaty, was forced to vote again. Ireland twice in the last 20 years voted against European treaties and were asked to vote again. And when the French And the Dutch voted against the European Constitution. They just rebranded it as the Lisbon Treaty and continued. So they've got no great record, as you say, of respecting referendums. And indeed, Juncker's made it clear since our referendum, he never wants to see another referendum in Europe on any European issue. He wants to trust the political class. But my question, Carol, is about our Parliament and our MPs. You know, if this final decision goes back to them, do you think they will hold faith with the way the British people voted, or do you think a great Brexit betrayal could be 18 months, 2 years down the line?
Well, surely, if they actually go against what their constituents looked for, and if they actually vote to sort of carry on being within the EU and going against their people, they're going to be out of a seat. Surely they can't be so short-sighted. You
may well be right, Carol from Folkestone. Thank you. And following on from that theme, you know, I get by text, the vote on the final deal is just a way of trying to stay in the EU. I think Starmer is a cuckoo in the Labour nest. Stabbing 4 or 5 million voters in the back is not the way to win the next election. Some Labour MPs will be very nervous about this. And I have to say, I think in the Midlands, the North, South Wales, particularly in those areas where there was a big Labour Brexit vote, I think potentially there's quite a lot of Labour MPs could be very vulnerable to this indeed. And my last caller on this subject is Pat, who's calling from Holton Regis. Good morning. Good morning, Nigel.
Right, I like to, this myth that we get 52% and 48% that's banned around by the Remainers and the media. If you put it into votes itself, it was 1,261,000, which is very significant, more than 52% and 48% that comes across.
Mm-hmm.
And also, no, I've got no trust or faith in our government or the opposition. Now, the mandate was handed to the government from the people of this country to negotiate coming out.
Yep.
And all we've seen is this woolliness of, well, we're going to give the EU something back, and we didn't vote for that. Now, if you put it on the other shoe when there's an election, if there's an election and the Tories won the election, you don't go back to Labour and say, well, you've got the mandate. They lost it.
They did?
It's the Tories. The Tories carry that election. The Tories carry on our negotiations, but the Tories have got to remember that Leave campaigners are leaving. We want to leave. There's no discussion on that.
We want to leave. There's no discussion. I thank you for that. And you've had the final word on that, and I totally agree. Well, from Article 50 to Article 155. Yes, Spain's Prime Minister has said he's going to impose direct rule on Catalonia. Catalan leader Charles Puigdemont has said this attempt by Spain to humiliate Catalonia is an attack on democracy. But do you agree that this is an attack on democracy, or is it Spanish law simply being obeyed? If you're worried about the implications for democracy, call me on 0345 6060 973. Perhaps you think Spanish law must be upheld at all costs, in which case text to 84850. Or perhaps you think Spain and Catalonia should have a referendum to sort it all out, in which case tweet Farage and LBC at LBC. We're back next. On FM.